Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be a part of this distinguished panel, and I'm honored to be in your presence today. I think as one of two military men on the panel, I would like to depart from the discussion thus far by the panel members that centers on the people at Camp Ashraf and talk more strategically about the objective, at least initially, of the MEK. As a word on my background to be able to do so, when I was a three-star general, I was Chief Operations Officer for all of the U.S. military. In my last job as a Commandant of the Marine Corps, I was also one of 6 advisors to both President Bush in his last years and the early years of President Obama. Ladies and gentlemen, I offer to you as a result of that, I think, what is a sobering assessment today. The greatest threat that I think we face on this planet is not global warming. It's not the global meltdown of our fiscal responsibilities. It is not a burgeoning China in the Pacific. The greatest threat that we face is a nuclear Iran. Having seen the ugly face of war, I appreciate the gravity of my statements, but I will tell you it's my belief at the pace of developments that we see today in Iran, that within a short 24 months, there will be a major confrontation between the United States and perhaps some of our Western allies and the nation of Iran. Unless one or both nations change its policy, I think that confrontation is absolutely inevitable. Now, our nations have not gotten along for 30 years. The agitation and the things that we have seen out there, I think, speak to that lack of coherence, going all the way back to the hostages of the Carter and Reagan years, but certainly through the terrorist attacks that have been talked about by Madame Rajovi, the miscalculations that both nations experienced during the tanker war, Iran's involvement in both Iraq and in Afghanistan. In June, based upon quality weapons coming into Iraq, the United States lost, we think, 13 soldiers to those weapon systems. Economically, we have been spatting with each other. We place sanctions on them. Iran desires within the OPEC to keep the cost of oil unnaturally high in order to be able to effect our recovery. And of course, most recently it has been talked about the terrorist plot to kill the Saudi ambassador on United States soil and the collateral damage that could occur in that restaurant, numbering in the tens and perhaps the hundreds of Americans. All of that, ladies and gentlemen, is on a hair trigger. No Western warship goes through the Straits of Hormuz unless they are at general quarters, ready for conflict. And in fact, last month, a British warship fired warning shots against Iranian boats when they approached too closely. But none of that compares to what is most disturbing, and that is, again, Iranian development of nuclear weapons. This development has been taking place now over 2 decades. The country has shrouded it or masked it, if you will, under the idea of nuclear energy. I'm sorry, the concept is almost laughable. Iran has more natural reserves of oil than virtually any nation on the face of the globe. It is cheap, it is efficient, and it is plentiful. So the idea that Iran would need nuclear power plants with the cost and the maintenance simply does not pass muster. The IAEA, although for years attempted to, I think, mitigate the impact of that development, now has said with the outgoing president that yes, he now firmly believes that Iran is in pursuit of nuclear weapons capability. United States policy, as stated by our president when he was candidate Obama, is that Iranian possession of nuclear weapons is, quote, unacceptable. Now, you ask yourself, why is that? There are over 30 nations on the globe today who have a nuclear capability. Not all have nuclear weapons, but those nations have nuclear power plants. Why shouldn't Iran be able to? Ladies and gentlemen, not one of those other 30 nations espouse the use of terrorism to accomplish national objectives. And any nation that has been attacked by terrorism, probably all nations, I would be so bold to say, are scared, incredibly scared of the idea of a state that supports terrorism in possession of nuclear weapons. But why war? Is war the only answer? Well, not necessarily, but we have tried engagement. We have tried quiet diplomacy. We've tried proxy diplomacy. We've tried sanctions. There's even been sabotage of the Iranian nuclear development. And I can't tell you today who that was, but all of that has simply delayed, not stopped, this progressive development as it continues. So what happens when Iran announces that they have now a nuclear weapons capability? Well, there are arguably three options. The first is military. You could launch an all-out attack to effect regime change. But ladies and gentlemen, that would be a difficult task. Another option, I suppose, would be to do nothing. America could potentially, containment will work here. But I suggest to you that what you would see instead is a regional proliferation of nuclear weapons. I do not believe that Saudi Arabia or Turkey, potentially even Egypt, would stand by, with Iran being the only country in the region to possess a nuclear capability. There is perhaps out there a third option, and that is change from within. And that's the change that Madame Rajavi proposes. My concern is that there may not be time, that there needs to be a sense of urgency if this potential catastrophe is to be avoided, and I'm just not sure that time is on our side. A word, if I can, on the MEK. I first encountered the MEK when I was a field commander in Iraq in 2004. I was assigned with my Marines to the Anbar province, and I was told shortly after we arrived that there was this terrorist organization sitting in the middle of our zone of responsibility. I can tell you I was not pleased, but I can also tell you that in very rapid order, as my commanders met with these people, discussed with them who they were, what their requirements were, and what their intentions were, they came back to me and said, these people are not terrorists. I met with them later, and I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, those people that we dealt with in 2004 were no more terrorists than this panel is here today. My conscience, though, still bothers me because I was part of that decision in 2003 to decide to allow Iraqis to put their AK-47 in the closet, but to tell the MEK, the people of the camps, at that point several camps in Iraq, that they could not have weapons. We said to them, we will protect you. History has proven us wrong. As Commandant, I sent Marines to Camp Ashraf to guard the people there. After they were in place, I visited. What I found was people just like you, people who opened their homes and their hearts to discussion, people who wanted to help us as we went about protecting them. Folks, I have looked closely at the issue of delisting, and I think perhaps I differ from some of our dais today in that I am fairly optimistic that delisting will happen, and I believe it will happen soon. I hope. The facts are the UK, the EU, even our US courts have decided that listing them makes no sense and have encouraged our government to follow that lead. Iranian Americans, some of whom are here today, are doing a wonderful job in our country keeping the momentum and keeping the whole concept in the eyes of our decision makers. as I got ready to fly here to Brussels, I turned on our most popular news channel in the United States. And there was Governor Ridge, and there was the Secretary General conducting a television interview on the subject. When I arrived here, I had email from at least 2 of my friends in New York City who had seen a full-page ad in the New York Times that essentially was an open letter to our president saying much of what Governor Ridge said to you in his comments. They have marshaled an impressive list of Americans who have been in government service, state or federal government service, only some of whom are here today. And some 94 senators and congressmen have co-signed, not just lent support, but have co-signed a compelling letter to the Secretary of State to delist. Last and not least, and Governor Dean said it, ladies and gentlemen, in 1 month it becomes an election year in our country. And no American president wants to see our values tarnished, if not dashed, such as we saw in the April massacre, and no president wants to go into an election with blood on his hands. So, Governor Dean, sir, you are the closest thing I know to someone with influence into that thought process. I encourage you to make the necessary connections and calls to try to ensure that the right thing happens. So what happens after delisting? Well, I think several things need to happen. There needs to continue, I believe, to be protection of the people of Ashraf. There needs to be what we call blue helmets from the United Nations on deck there to make sure there is no retribution for what may have been decided. The United States country team in Iraq needs to very much change their rhetoric, both military and civilian, with a new thought process now that these people are no longer on a list of terrorists, and they need to ensure that President Maliki and his organization do not, again, in some way, act poorly. We need to negotiate what's best for the people of Ashraf. Do they want to stay there? Do they want to go elsewhere? What is in their best interest and their quality of life? And we need to have that conversation with them. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, the Iraqi government is not a monolith. President Maliki needs to have pressure from within, because there are a number of people that I know in Iraq who are not the least bit happy that he is dancing at the end of the strings of people that are pulling those strings in the nation of Iran. And he also needs to understand that he may still be charged for violations that occurred in April. He certainly will be charged if other violations and loss of human life should follow. In closing, I return to this thought process of storm clouds on the horizon. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my conviction that if we are to avoid war, the death and the destruction, the additional horsemen of the apocalypse that would accompany such a thing, we need an Iran that does not seek nuclear weapons. We need an Iran that does not support international terrorism. And we need an Iran that does not murder its people on the streets. What we do need is an Iran that recognizes individual freedoms, that allows for representative government, and that will have the full intent to join with its friends and allies in the region. What we need is an Iran that's envisioned by the tenets of Madame Rajavi.